everybody. Welcome to day 2 of the draft. Kev is joining me today after last night. Kev, I know you're happy. You and I talked before the draft yesterday, and you had openly said if Gray Zabel was the guy, you were going to drive to Miami and kill Chris Greer. So
I don't think I said that exactly, but I did use some very colorful language when I found out that report was the thing that we were doing last night, and I'm just glad it didn't happen for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, no, and I'm fine with it. And this is a guy I actually pulled receipts. I was hyping Kenneth on Twitter, on Discord. I was hyping Kenneth Grant as a possibility since December, and our admin is drunk today calling me a fucking muffin on Twitter. So, but yeah, Kenneth Grant, how do you gotta say, what would you give that? I'd say just a solid B, because I don't think there's really an A pick at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a flashy pick, so it doesn't get an A, right? Because it's just another nose, it's just a nose tackle. But I think it's a solid B, maybe B minus, depending on what you think of other players on the board. But I thought Kenneth Grant was the second best defensive tackle in this class, and he rightfully went as the second defensive tackle off the board.
Yep. And I got a drunk Welshman yelling at me, so there we go. So beside the Dolphins, what stuck out to you about day one of the draft this year?
Whatever the hell the Atlanta Falcons are doing, I still do not understand what their process is. It's one thing to draft Jalen Walker, who I thought that was a good pick. He's a guy who's definitely going to fit with what they want to do. But to follow that up by trading a first-round pick for another edge rusher who had, to some degree, character concerns is an interesting thought process. All I know is that, if Chris Greer did that trade, the entirety of Dolphins Twitter, and rightfully so, would have wanted him fired on the spot for thinking that was the trade you make.
No, I agree.
To trade a first-round pick for another edge rusher when you have so many other holes on your offense or on your roster is concerning and confusing, to say the least.
Yeah, I like James Pierce. I actually think I like him better than Walker. So I think he's a great player. But if you're trading a future first, he better be getting you 3 to 4 wins by himself. I don't think he is. I was also entertained by the Falcon fans trying to argue that they did not use 2 first-round picks on Pierce yesterday.
Yeah. If you just cancel it all out like it's a giant math problem, they really just exchanged first-round picks, is a take that multiple fans had, which is not how that works. You gave up a first-round pick to take James Pierce.
Yeah, so that was interesting. Correct me if I'm wrong, you, Jordan, and I had Talik Williams going to us in the 3rd round, and he ended up being a first-round pick.
Yeah, I think we had him. I think we took him 3rd round. That last mock we did right before the draft. I had heard kind of after we did that his stock was rising. I didn't think it'd rise to a first-round pick, but
yeah, I saw Tom Pelissaro said that he was a first, but
I thought he'd be a 2nd-round pick by the time the draft started, but clearly some team liked him enough to take, and I think that sort of fits what the Lions have done. Just sort of reach for the talent you like and then figure it out from there.
Yeah, and Talik Williams just seems like the typical late day 2, early day 3 D tackle to me, where he'll be good. You might get a borderline Pro Bowler if everything goes right, but he's that guy you rotate in on pass downs who's going to win with energy. So, but I've also heard a lot of people say after from 18 to 90 in this draft, it's all about the same. You agree with that?
Yeah, I think once you get past the first, I think this year in particular, it was the first 19, 18 picks, you started picking effectively from the same tier of players. And I think especially at defensive tackle, once Derek Harmon went off the board at 21, the difference between Talik Williams and other guys picked early in the 2nd round are probably negligible at best. you feel like you have a need there and you need to take a defensive tackle, another defensive lineman, and you're a team like the Detroit Lions who don't have an early second round pick, take one in the first round, right? Like if he becomes a rotation player for you, that's probably a good pick.
Yeah. No one is backstage right now, just me and Kev. But yeah, no, that was an interesting one. Rich get richer for the Eagles. I'm not as big of a fan of Jihad Campbell as a lot of people are, but when you're the Eagles, you can just afford to just gamble on someone who has a bad shoulder, and if he doesn't work out, it's not going to
hurt you. And a potential knee issue. It's got about 3 different medical concerns in there, but no, I mean, I agree that if you're a team like that, you can afford to take risks like that because you're not judged off of one first-round pick.
Yeah.
To the same degree, I think that may have been a reason why the Dolphins didn't consider Will Johnson in the first round, because it's a lot different when you're the Dolphins, and that first-round pick has to be a contributor day one.
Yeah. I will still stand by my statement that, especially now, every pick that Will Johnson is not taken is one I will still vouch for him to be drafted, hopefully by the Dolphins. But without even looking, and this has been a topic all day that I've seen. I've been busy today, so I couldn't get into too much. It seems like most people are leaning cornerback with this pick. Looking at the board, I think it makes sense as of right now, though I expect to see 3 to 4 corners go as soon as the draft starts this afternoon or this evening. And I don't know if you saw or heard what Chris Greer and Mike McDaniel was saying last night. It doesn't really sound to me like they're too worried about corner, or rather, they're not going to reach for a corner. So if the board doesn't fall, this is an example. I'm not saying this guy, but Noel Williams is a guy I like. If 4 or 5 guys go, they're not going to reach for Noel Williams at 48. They're just going to go who's the best player on their board. And the impression I get is I kind of think they were going more after nickels than actually boundary corners right now.
Yeah, I think I had mentioned this probably on this show once, that I thought that you could play Kader Kohou outside and not miss too much of a beat. And for the most part, it seems like maybe they think similar. I think that if you think Kader Kohou's your starting nickel, you're not going after nickels. But they brought in Upton Stout for a visit. He's a pure nickel. They brought in a few other pure nickels on visits, or spoke to multiple of them at the combine. It feels very intentional the way they're going about this. And whether that means they're doubling down and taking 2 or they're just taking the 1, it's pretty telling how you approach the pre-draft process to me, and not necessarily that you're drafting those guys, but you brought in multiple nickels. That's not something you just do because you want to get more input on those 3 players.
Yeah. Yeah, so it'll be interesting. If it was me, I would take a corner. But just the more I think about it, the more I'm just I think it's either going to be a safety, offensive line, or I think a tight end.
Wouldn't shock me if it's an offensive lineman.
What's that?
I said it wouldn't shock me if it was an offensive lineman.
No, it wouldn't either. And, there is some romanticism, if you're a Dolphins fan, to drafting Mason Taylor. And I'd be fine. I don't think he'll be there, but I'm not going to just throw out my draft board to draft Mason Taylor either. Honestly, I'd probably go Gunnar Helm or Terrence Ferguson, or even Harold Fannin in round 3. All of whom I think fit the system a lot better. Fannin is basically just Jonnu Smith.
Yeah, I don't think Fannin is a fit, because if you have Jonnu Smith, why do you need another Jonnu Smith? You probably can't play 2 Jonnu Smiths.
Yeah. Well, what you could do is you could sub out Alec Ingold for Fannin.
Then you lose the blocking,
But Ingold does have some blocking issues himself.
If you're trying to be this team that runs the ball and establishes the run, you can't have Harold Fannin and Jonnu Smith on the field together, I don't think. I see very few pathways where that's a solution to any problems. If the plan is to take Harold Fannin if he's there in the 4th round, that's fine because that's just a value pick at that point. You're never drafting for the 3rd round, or 4th round, but I still think you can get a starter or two here. So,
yeah. You ever see a drunk dog toy? Because this is exactly what you're seeing in the chat. Yeah, just names I threw out. I think Harold Fannin makes more sense from a Dolphin standpoint than Mason in round 3 or 4 than Mason Taylor in round 2. But again, when you take the romanticism into it, I think Mason Taylor is an option. But I think right now Nick Emanwari, if he's there, might become the favorite at 48.
Would not shock me. He's a good fit for what they want to do on defense, and he's a good fit in Weaver's system. He reminds me of Kyle Hamilton, not to say he is Kyle Hamilton, but
yeah,
he reminds me of some of the stuff Kyle Hamilton does in that Weaver, Baltimore Ravens, McDonald defense. And so I think the fit's there. I would just have to know what the cornerback board looks like, because I still think there are 4 cornerbacks I take in the 40s if they're there, which not all 4 will be there. There will inevitably be 1 or 2 off the board. But I mean, you get Will Johnson, you get Savon Revel, you get even like AZ Thomas, the Florida State corner, right? Like, you still have corners there who I think are valuable players and really good players. And so I think you can get a starting corner here. Go get a starting corner so that you don't have to try and do the whole vet free agency thing afterwards and add 4 or 5 corners and hope 1 or 2 of them hits.
Yeah. Plus, as Chris Greer said yesterday, you can get corners anywhere. We're better at finding corners undrafted than we are at drafting them anymore. I think the last good corner we drafted was X, which is a decade ago?
Was it a decade ago?
Almost. That was 2016, right?
I thought it was 2018, but it was almost certainly not 2018, I don't think. Yeah, it was the 2nd round of the 2016 NFL draft. It's been close to a decade.
Yeah.
Oh my!
So to go along with that, X was an older prospect, right? Do you think they may gamble on someone like Darian Porter, who's also older but a lot more athletic than X was?
I don't get the sense that the Dolphins are a team that just takes older guys off their board.
Mm-hmm.
I think historically they just haven't done that either. I think that they're going to take the best corner available. Like, that's still what I think happens in the 2nd round.
Okay.
Maybe some things change, but I think that's what happens in the 2nd round, is that they just take best corner available, fill that need, and then the rest of your draft, the 9 or so picks you have after that, are best player available, taking the best fits instead of the best positional needs, which is probably a better place to be.
Mr. S, to answer this, Will Johnson, I think it's just a matter of when a team decides talent is worth the fall. So he could be the first pick off the board, or he could fall till, honestly, probably when Baltimore picks next, because that just seems like what Baltimore does.
When does Philly pick next? I'll take him.
Yeah, we're Philly. So Will Johnson, it's tough just because as much as I love him and I would say he's going to come off right away, it sucks to admit this, but if the knee injury is a concern, I don't know. What I will say is I think not the degenerative knee injury, if it is legitimately that, is good. I think that's better than, say, people who just had microfracture surgery. As for Shedeur, I don't know if anybody follows Angry Vet Scout on X, but he said he thinks that Shedeur falls to the 3rd or 4th round. What about you?
It's always interesting once you have a quarterback fall past the 1st round, because we saw this with Malik Willis a few years ago. People thought he was a 1st-round prospect, and he had this insane fall on day 2 because, I mean, the truth is, once you get to day 2, teams are not prioritizing quarterbacks. They're prioritizing other positions. They're betting on traits. My take is it would not shock me if Jalen Milroe was taken before Shedeur Sanders, and everyone starts to have a conversation about what we're doing there, because I think to some degree, the ceiling on Sanders is lower. And when the ceiling is lower, teams are not taking a low ceiling quarterback in the 2nd round. I would take him in the 2nd round. If I was a team that needed a quarterback, I'd take him in the 2nd round. But I get why NFL teams don't do it. So it would not shock me if he's there late second or third round.
Yeah, I forget who said it, but it was mentioned last night on Twitter that when asked about it, scouts said, yeah, he's a lot like Andy Dalton. That's not a compliment as a prospect. Like, that means he's viewed as a game manager. He's a day 2, maybe early day 3 pick in the eyes of NFL teams, which is fine. But the difference is he does not. Most of those quarterbacks don't have Deion Sanders as their dad, who is trying to run everything. It'll be interesting. I've heard Milrow. I've heard people say Tyler Show or however you say the Louisville quarterback's last name.
Shuck like corn.
Like Shuck, Tyler Shuck. So I've heard both of them potentially going in round 2 before him. What does my boy Callum have to say? Imagine what kind of life to be compared to Andy Dalton. Yeah. Yeah, it's good to have you back, Callum, and I'm actually making sure I say your name right because I always call you Calum. But let's just assume that. Well, let me ask you 2 questions. Would you assume that Will Johnson and Shavon Rebel are the next 2 corners off the board?
I think it'll be Amos and Johnson. I think Rebel might fall a little bit more, but I think one of those or 2 of those 3 are the next 2 corners off the board.
Okay. And let's say 2 of those 3 are not going to be available at 48. Is that safe to assume?
Yes, 2 of those 3 probably are not available at 48.
Okay. So I feel like a lot of people who listen to mocks, listen to podcasts, they know the names, but they don't really know the players. So assuming we aren't going to get Amos and Johnson, how would you rank the next 5 cornerbacks, and what would you say their strengths are, especially for the Dolphins?
Let me pull up a big board so I actually know the names in front of my face, which I have one up right now. So let's assume that Johnson and Amos are the next 2 corners off the board. I'd go Revel 1. Some injury concerns, but he's a super athletic corner with incredible ball skills. I think he's a starter in the NFL if those medicals check out, which it appears that they're not as serious as other medicals, other prospects per se. So if that's the case, I think you take him round 1 and you don't even think twice, or round 2 rather, and you don't even think twice. Number 2, it's so difficult for me to find a place to put this guy because those medicals seem to be at least semi-concerning, but I think Benjamin Morrison, from a talent perspective, is a really talented player, and he's a guy who's going to be a starter in the NFL. But the biggest issue is that while I think he really understands how to play corner at a really high level. He's got good athleticism. His technique is up there. It's the injuries. He's had hip injuries. He's had shoulder injuries. Like, to some degree, you're a walking medical red flag. And for a team like Miami, are you going to take another medical red flag when the big thing this offseason has been effectively calling players out because they haven't been healthy? That's just a question mark, I think, for a team like Miami. 3 is AZ Thomas. I think AZ Thomas has just continued to rise up boards. And again, another really athletic corner. He might be the fastest corner in this class. Good length and good physicality as well. I don't think he's a finished cornerback product by technique, but from the pure athletic standpoint, that's a home run pick. And he is relatively younger. I think he's like 21, 22. So he's not on the older side of things either. But if you're looking for a corner who you can develop and allow the athletic traits to combine with good coaching, that's the guy you take. I think Jacob Parrish is the 4th best cornerback left outside of those top 2 guys. Parrish is more of a nickel, so I don't know if the Dolphins would take him in the 2nd. But again, athletic, plays with a good physicality. Like, he fits a lot of the traits you want out of a nickel. The issue is that he's just undersized. And I don't know if that leads to him ever being able to play on the outside, which maybe the Dolphins are prioritizing that still. And if they're prioritizing that, I think there would be other guys later in the class even that they'd like. And then I really like Darian Porter. I know other people have been a little bit lower on him. But I think Darian Porter, even with some of the age concerns, he's like 24, so there's probably not as high a ceiling. I think that there is this. The popular comp has been Tariq Woolen from the Seattle Seahawks, and it's because he's another athletic, lengthy corner who has really good ball skills. But the issue for him is that he might be a little too tall, because I don't know if he knows how to use his body properly yet, and that's concerning. But I think those ball skills, I think that athleticism, that's a day one player. That's a day one starter. That's a guy I'd take at 48.
Yeah. The athleticism is there, but Darian Porter, just like how raw he is, it's just kind of tough for me. So the question is going up to is that I've been seeing is there's a huge drop off from offensive line after 48. And I think too many people are still falling into the trap last year where, again, I don't think the plan was Robert Jones and Liam Eichenberg. It just ended up being that way because they didn't have a good plan B. But do you think, well, first of all, I think we both can agree that we should use picks to trade up after 48 as well to try and get some talent. But do you think if we stay at our pick at 96, that we can still get a quality starter on the offensive line?
I don't know if you get a quality starter, but I don't think you get someone who's awful and unplayable as a starter. I think that the concerns is that once you get past Savanea, the giant Arizona offensive guard, who would be the guy I take. Like if he's there at 48 and you want to take offensive line over corner, go take that guy. That guy's a day one starter at left guard or right guard. And you move James Daniels over without a doubt. Like take him and we'll figure it out. Then I look at the list. Like I think Dylan Fairchild's fine. I think Marcus Embo is fine. I think Wyatt Milam is fine. Right? Like the list of players to me is a lot of they're fine. They may do a job, but they're never going to be perfect. Can they be starters? The one that would intrigue me the most, I think, is I'd want to see a guy like Charles Grant. I think Charles Grant, incredibly raw, still not fully understanding of how to use his frame and his arm length and his athleticism, but I think that's a guy who can play tackle, who can play guard at the next level. And for a team like Miami, that may mean having to have a fill-in for a year, whether that's Liam Eichenberg, God forbid, or you just sign someone or you draft someone later who can be a quality, just average to slightly below average starter. I think Charles Grant's potential is through the roof.
Yep. I heard Kyle Crabb say the same thing where he actually said he'd consider Charles Grant at 48.
I would have that. Might be a little too early for me, but I can see why. I think if you're banking on athletic traits, there's no better offensive tackle to try and develop, or offensive guard, right? I think that there is very much a situation where if you feel like you just love the talent and that's the guy you take, and Dolphins fans may not like it, I think that would be a solid but maybe concerning pick at 48, excuse me.
Oh, if it was at 20, it would be, what are you doing?
If it was at 28, again, we would have to have a conversation about who's running this team, because that would also mean you traded up for him, which don't do that.
No. All right. Running back, there are some interesting names on the board. I am one that have said, and I know a lot of people don't like him, I would say late round 3, early or round 4, get a Cam Scatabo, Neal from Kansas, Damian Martinez. I would take any of those 3, but do you consider either of the Ohio State running backs today, or even Kalen Johnson, who I think is better than both, who's probably the number 2 running back in my opinion in this class?
If Caleb Johnson's there at 97 or if they pick him the 3rd round, yeah. I don't consider him in the 2nd. If you want to trade up for a running back, I think that's kind of counterintuitive. You did that last year, maybe don't do it again. But I don't think either of the Ohio State guys are options, but I do think that there's certainly a pathway for a guy like Caleb Johnson, who's a great scheme fit to make sense for the Dolphins.
Another scenario I brought up, and I think round 3 or 4 is for running back. I was just curious if you thought day 2 or like at least round 2 would be something. Looking at the board that I think would be tempting is doubling up on D tackle. It's maybe not be something other people like, but the way to look at it is you're getting Benito Jones out of the starting lineup more, or into a lower rotation.
Well, I think Benito Jones is already out of the starting lineup with Kenneth Grant.
Yeah, fair enough. But you're moving them farther into rotation. But like, if you get a chance at Darius Alexander, Alfred Collins, do you double up now, or is doubling up now like just a day 3 thing to you?
If Darius Alexander's there, I'd have to think long and hard about not doing it, because I think Darius Alexander is a really terrific player. My only concern would be, I think the earliest you draft a defensive tackle means that one less need is going to be filled.
Yeah.
Because I don't think you can get a starting corner and a potentially starting offensive guard in the 3rd and 4th round. I think that you are probably punting on one of those positions to free agency, which is fine. You still need another defensive tackle. You probably need more than one, but like you still need a defensive tackle. And so if you love one of the talents, maybe, but I think there's too much talent at other positions for me to do that at 48.
The dinosaur wants to know how you keep your hair so vibrant.
Use a comb. That's about all I do. And some shampoo. That's a very creative hair routine here.
Yeah. All right. So, Kev, you've been on record saying you think we're going best corner available. If we do not go corner at 48, what do you think the move is? Or do you think it's basically offensive line, corner or offensive line?
It's not corner. The 3 names that I think would be taken is Nicky Manwari, because it would not shock me if the Dolphins loved that skill set enough.
And we did bring him in for a 30. He was like the first guy we brought in for a 30 visit.
Jonah Savanaya is, I think, the second guy who the Dolphins would absolutely take. Again, I think he's a physical offensive lineman, which they haven't had a lot of, truthfully. Liam Eichenberg. I think that they would absolutely consider that. And then the other 2, it's actually 2 names that I think would potentially be the pick if it isn't corner, would be wide receiver. Would not shock me if they went wide receiver. Would not shock me if they went with one more playmaker, knowing that Tyreek Hill is effectively a ticking time bomb.
I would love Luther Burden in this offense.
Luther Burden in this offense would go for 1,000 yards a year. I also think that a guy like Higgins from Iowa State is a really dynamic player and a guy who would fit in this offense. And if it's none of those, would not shock me, and I know that this would be unpopular, would not shock me if it was a pure offensive tackle. A guy like Ariante Ursary, who probably is never playing guard, but is a really high ceiling tackle. I think you could have the conversation about moving guys down or moving guys around, and it is effectively drafting 5 offensive linemen and picking the best 5. And so maybe that's moving Austin Jackson back into guard and putting Ursary at tackle or whatever, right? It would not shock me if that was a move they made.
Yep. I did just pull up NFL.com day 2 mock. Eric Edholm has us taking Noel Williams at 48. And I do like Noel Williams. That might be a little high, but he's not making it to our 2nd round pick or 3rd round pick, excuse me.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. If it's Noel Williams, would not be my pick, but it's not a pick I would be upset about.
Alrighty. So we are about 20 minutes from the draft starting. So this is just going to be a quick one. But yeah, your dream I'll ask you two questions. Your dream scenario for tonight for the picks, and your realistic.
The dream scenario is Savon Revel. I don't know how to say his first name. That's the one that's a little weird to me. Revel at 48. And then I would be ecstatic with Charles Grant at 97. I think it is 90 something.
Yeah, 96, 97.
97, yeah, somewhere around there. Would be ecstatic with Charles Grant in the third. More realistically, because I don't think that's what's going to happen, I'm going to go AZ Thomas, the Florida State corner at sorry, my hair would not be a good NFL player. Don't think it would be able to cover shit on the field. I think AZ Thomas is probably going to. I would say AZ Thomas is the pick at 48. I don't know that for sure. I think the Dolphins will love that upside. Will love the young player. Will love taking a guy from the state of Florida. So I'll go AZ Thomas, and then trying to figure out. I think AZ Thomas, and then an offensive lineman of some kind. I'll go Wyatt Milam just for shits and giggles because I have to pick someone because I picked four other names. So Wyatt Milam, the West Virginia guard tackle.
Wyatt Milam is my candidate in the third round. But just because Chris Grier loves to piss people off, it's going to be Hollis Pierce.
It's going to be it's going to be another defensive tackle. They're going to take 3 defensive tackles or something.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, we are cutting this a little short just because, again, I got caught up in work and I'm swamped. But it is almost draft time.
I also didn't realize the draft was at 7. I don't know why I thought it started at 8 again.
Yeah, it starts earlier, but let's see. And last question. What pick does the corner run start at?
I think one of the Chicago picks ends up being a corner.
I think of Chicago.
Yep. They've got 2, 39 and 41. I think one of those is where the first corner goes.
Okay. And is Shedeur Sanders the first quarterback taken today, or is it Milroe, like you said earlier?
Milroe's the first quarterback taken, and then I'll even go one further. I think Shedeur Sanders is a Raider or a Seahawk by the end of the night.
Right, you heard it here first. And Kev also said you didn't hear this, but he said if he's wrong there, he is shaving his head on stream next time.
I am not doing that, largely because I would look awful as a bald person. Just not a fit that's going to fit me very well.
Yep. But all right, everybody get ready to enjoy the draft. I apologize that life delayed the stream. Otherwise, we would have done a little longer. But I hope everybody enjoys, and we'll be back tomorrow to talk more drafts. So later, everybody.